I have been playing with the word meaning lately. So, can we talk about what makes a meaningful life for us?
Love that question, Ryan. And I think that many things make a meaningful life. And for everybody, it's a little bit different. But for the majority of people, it is a combination of a number of things. And, it's sort of like the way that you can think about that question is to think about the absence of that, right? If people come to me with, like, let's say, emptiness or depression or anxiety, how do you think about what's missing? And the way that I often think about that is through looking at four things: the psychosocial, spiritual framework. And that's also the framework that I would use with respect to meaning. And so, for someone's life to be meaningful, biologically, they have to be healthy and feeling in tune with their body and connected to their body and doing things that are, you know, in line with their ultimate well-being as opposed to self-sabotaging, such as, using drugs or alcohol excessively or, having a diet that is not healthy or just beating themselves up. The next is psychologically. What kind of life do you need to have psychologically for it to feel meaningful? You need to have gratitude. You need to have in your life an appreciation for what you have. And what are the things that undermine that? Attitudes like victim mentality, attitudes like entitlement, where you feel that the problem lies outside of you and that unless you have what you demand, you cannot possibly be happy. Right? So that's psychologically. Then you look at socially. What do you need to have a meaningful life socially? Meaningful relationships, authentic connections, both with yourself and with others, and sometimes with even a higher power and the divine. And that brings me to the fourth point, the spiritual point. So, to have meaning in one's life, one also often needs to have a connection to something greater. You do not have to necessarily believe in God or be a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, but to be in flow with life and believe that the world is a little bit bigger than just you. Believing that we are all there is, that's okay too. You could have that belief as long as you can also be in flow with life and be able to practice surrender and practice some things where you are part of a greater whole, recognizing that we're all interconnected as human beings.
What I picture is riding a wave. And, sometimes it's up and sometimes it's down, and you're kind of going where the wind blows you. One of the things I have a tendency personally to do in my life is if you think about riding a horse, I'm gripping onto those reins and my knuckles are getting white and I'm trying to control the uncontrollable in essence. And so for somebody asking for a friend, right, who
All of
is
us are asking for a friend, always.
yes. Yes, we are. For somebody who's having a hard time with really going with that flow and surrendering, releasing that control, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think that also that struggle and that conflict between controlling our destiny and our life and being able to go with the flow and surrender to a greater force, which can lift us up. I think that that conflict is actually a very existential, fundamental human struggle that we're all struggling with. It's very normal to be struggling with that. And, to different people to different degrees, right? We don't necessarily want to fully and completely surrender. We are agents of our destiny. We are supposed to make choices and deliberately commit to things and make them happen. And at the same time, there's another way of creating reality and manifesting, which is also to listen to what life is telling you and to be in tune with that. And sometimes when we're pushing really, really, really hard, we might not be listening or seeing what is the greater message here. And it's important to learn from those messages as well.
How does
How
one
does
start
one
to listen to what life is telling them?
There are many different, I guess you can say, voices or parts of us within us, right? There is our rational part, the part that is very deliberate and linear in the way that we process information. And there's the emotional part, which is much messier. And that voice can be strong and overwhelming, overpowering, sometimes uncontrollable. And then there is, underneath that, the still quiet voice that can only be heard when the yelling of the thoughts and emotions temporarily becomes still. And in that space, that still quiet voice is our intuition. So that is one of the ways, being attuned to your intuition, because your intuition can give you guidance about your life that your reason and your emotion can have a really hard time accessing. That's one of the ways to be in tune with life. That's the more internal way. There's also an external way. The external way is to see what life is presenting to you on the outside. And sometimes life can present some very interesting and meaningful coincidences, otherwise known as synchronicities, that can move your life forward. Synchronicity is a term coined by Swiss psychologist Carl Jung to define two things happening where they're meaningful to you, but one doesn't necessarily cause the other. Such as you might have a dream about someone you haven't thought about in ages, and suddenly the next day you bump into them on the street. Your dream didn't cause that. And yet, that's quite meaningful to you. You're like, wait, you won't believe this. I just had a dream about you. Or you think about someone and suddenly that person calls. That's a synchronicity. So, synchronicities could be the external way in which the universe or something greater gives you messages, and heeding one's intuition is the internal way of being able to follow life's call or being flow with life or listen to what life is telling you.
So there's like a balance there of that internal and external. It reminds me of like balancing the masculine and feminine, both allowing and then seeing the facts in front of you. Yes?
Absolutely. And that, like the masculine and feminine, that makes me think about what we were talking about before, which is the different ways that we could find meaning or the different ways that we can manifest things in our life, right? One way is the deliberate, like, I want this and I'm going to work really, really hard and make it happen, right? That's the more masculine way. Traditionally, obviously, masculine and feminine, the definitions have changed. We're all a little masculine, a little feminine. It's just the way that we are. Masculinity and femininity are dynamic, but the more traditionally masculine way is deliberate. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to work really hard. Boom. I'm going to manifest this through hard work and effort. And then there's the other way, which is not by hard work and effort. It's actually the opposite. It is occupying a space where you start to match the vibration of whatever it is that you would like to draw in. It's a much more passive, feminine way of being. It's not about doing. It's precisely about being. And so you want to be in joy, in light, in love, in happiness, in gratitude. And you occupy those states. And by doing that, you magnetize to you whatever it is that you want. It's very hard to magnetize joy, happiness, and peace when you don't exist in that state yourself, when you can exist in depression, anxiety, and fear, right? And so the first way is a deliberate masculine. I'm going to make it happen. The second way is you magnetize to you and through being become the state that you would like. That's the harder way. Even for females who are trained in this masculine world on how to achieve, that's the harder way to manifest. But it's just as powerful, sometimes even more powerful if you can master it.
That's so beautiful. I love that. And those distinctions are very important because when I picture myself on that horse, I am more in my forcing or doing or making happen, this free will, which, like you said, is necessary and needed. But there's an imbalance there, I think, for many of us. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Absolutely. And especially, I think most of us lean more towards the masculine, especially if you're ambitious in any way. And if you've succeeded in this three-dimensional world, we lean towards masculine manifestation. But there's also people who find it very hard to manifest in that way and actually are just much more about being. There are people who naturally are like that. For them, it's a little harder to manifest by like directed, self-contained action. And so people fall on the spectrum one way or the other. And whatever your natural inborn strength is, it's always good just to grow as a person, to challenge yourself to manifest in the other way and to grow in the opposite way.
I love that. So I've been growing in the being way for the past like decade or so because I am slash was an achiever and was taught and conditioned to do well in school and, go out and get what you want, that kind of thing. And so I think that is an important pin for me to put in it of like this more receptive way of just being in the vibration of what it is that you seek is a way of calling things to you. Yes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And also to be in that vibration, you will be so much happier. it's interesting, like, 'cause then you're like, "What's the mechanism?" Is it just that, one vibration draws in another vibration, so we draw in the level at which we vibrate? Or is it that you're gonna be happier, and then it's gonna be much easier to take the actions that you want to take to create that, you know? And it's probably a combination of both, but absolutely. So I love, Ryan, that you are on that journey yourself.
So you called your book Fulfilled, and the word happier is in your subtitle. But what is the difference between fulfillment and happiness?
So I see happiness as one of two things. There's eudaimonic happiness, which is more Aristotle, and then there's hedonic happiness. Hedonic happiness is that I feel happy in the moment, and it's usually dopamine based and it's fleeting, but it feels really, really good. And we all want some of that. So, however, it could also be the root of addiction and it could be the root of bad things as well, right? And then there's eudaimonic happiness, which is happiness that doesn't necessarily feel great every moment, but is happiness based on purpose and meaning. That is, I think, more in line with fulfillment because it's an enduring, sustaining, long term happiness based on taking actions that are in line with your so called longer term happiness and higher good. And it's not to say that you should therefore undermine all hedonic happiness and we don't like that's anathema and bad. No, we all want to feel good. We want to laugh with friends. We want to, have a really good time in life. But if you're constantly chasing hedonic happiness at the cost of eudaimonic happiness, ultimately you end up feeling empty.
Interesting. When I
Interesting.
look at
And
our
I look
culture
at
today, I see a lot of hedonic happiness. I don't, this could be me projecting, but when I discovered positive psychology, I realized that it is, like you said, I love the words that you used, an enduring or sustaining happiness. So I realized it's not so much, if I'm feeling, kind of grumpy on one certain day that I'm not a happy person. No, I'm still a happy person even when I have a hard day. So for somebody who's like, well, I am having a hard day today. I do just want to feel happier. I do just want to scroll on Instagram. What would you say to that person who's like enduring, sustaining? That sounds exhausting, right?
absolutely, yes. Exhausting on one hand, and they're not mutually exclusive. I want them to have their hedonic happiness. It's not in a way that ultimately undermines their eudaimonic happiness. So, an example of that could be really addiction is the best example, right? And addiction comes in many flavors. There's drug and alcohol addiction, which we're most familiar with. Then there's behavioral addictions, which is like, addiction to your social media or sex addictions or workaholism, right? And also to be clear, none of the things are bad in moderation. All of these things are bad in excess, right? Where the more of it you have, the emptier you feel. And then there's like the third level, right? And that's psychological addictions. And this is addictions to money, power, status, achievement, fame. Also, a little bit of all of that is great for everybody, but addiction is when you need it. You need it. You need it so badly, you're willing to do anything for it and make bad choices. And the more of it you need and have, the emptier you feel. So this is how I think you want, some hedonic happiness and you want it in a positive, sustained way. But then you also don't want to undermine yourself by becoming an addict psychologically, behaviorally, or with any substances.
Mm. Your work to me is so rich in what I would call equanimity. Like you have such this beautiful approach to the concepts that you speak about. And I have this sense that neutrality is part of the work that either you do personally or professionally. Can you speak to why neutrality may be a really good place for us to hang out, Dr. Anna?
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree. Neutrality is such an amazing and powerful concept. And we can think of it as an asymptote, right? Because like something that you get closer and closer to, but never really reach for many things. And yet there are probably plenty of things you're just naturally neutral towards. Would you like spinach or broccoli? I'm neutral. Either way, good. you know, but do you want to marry this person or that person? I'm not so neutral, or do you want to do this work or this work? I'm not so, how do you want to spend your time? Not so neutral, right? And so it's a really, really beautiful thing. It's actually a Buddhist concept because we in the Western world live in this world of attachment. We're attached to this and that, and we want to feel really good. We want that hedonic happiness. It's the antithesis of neutrality. We want passion. Like, do you want a relationship where you're completely neutral to the person? Where they walk into the room and you're like, "Hi." No, I don't think,
No.
yeah, not too many people want a fully neutral, passionless relationship. We want the opposite. And all the movies tell us that's what we should be having, right? And yet, after we've been through hard times, we realize that our attachments are actually at the root of, and our deep desires are at the root of so much of our pain. And then we start to think about releasing attachment and desire in the name of neutrality in order to reduce pain in our life and increase equanimity.
Mm. So you say that authenticity is one of your non-negotiable happiness habits, so to speak. What is authenticity to you? Is this your north star in your personal and professional life, or one or the other?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that's at the root of so much because authenticity is who you really are at the core. And that is what I help my patients to discover. And who one is at the core is different from who they are based on all the other voices in society, based on what their mother wanted them to be, based on what society wants them to be, based on what their children or husband or wife or best friend or all of the other expectations of others. Oftentimes, before we know who we really are, we can live in a world of masks, meaning that we can have all these different masks, being everything to everybody, people pleasing, thinking that this is who we're supposed to be. But one day we realize we can be doing all this, thinking we're doing it all right, but we're not fully happy. So, how do we get to the root of what will make us happy? How do we take off the mask? And only then do you start to get in touch with your inner voice, your soul. We talked about intuition before. Intuition is the voice of your soul. That is that still quiet voice that can only be heard when the other voices, like thoughts and emotions, temporarily quiet. And it's by listening to your intuition and becoming in touch with that part of yourself that you can really start to learn who you are and be more authentic in life.
So I'm hearing you say that authenticity is another word for soul. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Authenticity is connecting to your soul, aligning with your soul. Absolutely. And when you don't have it, what happens when you're misaligned with your soul? You can get anxious and depressed and have fears and feel like you're not living your purpose, feel like everything's off, you're in the wrong relationship, you're in the wrong job, all kinds of things like that.
What's your take on like a dark night of the soul? I don't know if that's what you would call it, but that rock bottom moment that somebody's having that feels like, oh my gosh, how am I going to dig out of this trench? What's your take on that?
Yeah, often those are really transformative moments. And when people come to me as a psychiatrist or executive coach in such a moment, we use that to the benefit of the client or patient. We help them to pull out and to use precisely that darkness to turn their life around and to be like, okay, so here I am. Now, what do I need to do and how do I need to change my life to get to the next level with this?
So do you find that a lot of the times people who are in that very dark place do come out of that place with a really strong sense of what their destiny is?
Yeah, I think that dark nights of the soul, if they don't break somebody, they teach somebody, right? And sometimes you need to be broken in order to be taught. So it's not uncommon that it will do both. And you learn who you are on the other side. You can learn that you're stronger than you used to be, that you're different than you used to be. You can learn who your true friends are. You can learn that you need to change your life, either change your relationship, change your career path, change your sense of purpose, start to live differently, start to have different coping strategies, start to take medication, start to, change your biology, whatever that is. Dark nights of the soul, if they don't break you, which hopefully they will not, they will teach you and you become a stronger person on the other side.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking as someone who's been in a dark night of the soul after the birth of my first child, I hadn't slept in like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And it started to get very very dark, very fast, and it felt like in all of the sudden, the floor dropped out, but, of course, in retrospect and a decade plus later, I'm like, "Oh, it wasn't all of the sudden at all," there was this sign and there was that sign, and was I taking care of myself like I could have been, or was I tapped into those 4 areas that you talked about in the beginning? No, not so much, like, maybe 2 out of 4 if I'm lucky. So, I think speaking from personal experience, there's such a valuable gold nugget, if you will, to be resourced from that really hard place. So you used the word destiny before, and I keep going back to it because I feel as though if we in our culture all had a deeper sense, perhaps, of a destiny or a calling, that we all might be a little bit happier. What are you seeing is getting in the way of most people realizing why they're here?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things, but one of them is this lack of authenticity that we talked about, right? People feel that they have to live a certain life according to certain standards without necessarily trying to figure out who they really are and what they really need to be doing. That's number one. Number two is I think that there is unfortunately a lot of entitlement as well. And entitlement is an attitude that is, it's a very dangerous mentality because it's fundamentally incompatible with gratitude. And so, because if you're entitled and you get what you feel that you're entitled to, you're not grateful. You just are, you're, of course, that's what I deserve. I expected that. Right. So it's fundamentally incompatible with gratitude. And then if you're entitled and don't get what you expect, then you're upset. So either you're upset or just take for granted what you have. So there's no gratitude. And for people to feel aligned and having true purpose, gratitude is also fundamental. And I think the other thing is that the world is changing. And I think there's a lot of confusion about roles and what people should be doing. The job market's changing because of AI, et cetera. What the world was 10 years ago is no longer that same world. And I think the lack of authenticity makes people feel that they have to look outside of themselves to figure out what they should be doing and who they are, whereas the answers are often within.
You're someone who's achieved massive success. I mean, I'm reading what Deepak Chopra wrote about your book. Like, you have achieved this massive worldly success, Dr. Anna. Was there a moment where you got to the top of the mountain and thought, this isn't what I thought it was going to be?
So, with respect to my profession now, I absolutely love what I do because I get to speak to wonderful people like you. I get to work with amazing patients and clients, and I feel like I have freedom in my life and purpose. And it's the kind of purpose that it's the right purpose for me, right? There's a lot of diversity and a lot of different things, but it wasn't always the case. There were so many sacrifices to get here. And when I was a resident, and I didn't, you're talking about sleep deprivation. When I was sleep deprived as an NYU psychiatry resident and all kinds of other things like this, I was like, am I really doing the right thing? Do I need to be like literally torturing myself in order to become the psychiatrist? Maybe there's another way. And so, there's a lot of things like that, a lot of questioning. The sacrifices were at the outset, and there was a lot of them. And there was times that I was just like, maybe this isn't for me. I don't really like to be tortured. I actually like to be well rested and get a full night's sleep. Shocking.
Right. So novel. So you
Now,
realized along the way, like, this is really hard and I'm still choosing this. Yeah.
absolutely, that this is really hard and I need to do everything I can to minimize the pain. And I tried to do that. And at the same time, that this is really, really hard. And if I want this enough, there are sacrifices and there is hard work. And so thank God I was able to deal with the sacrifices, but at times I didn't know if I would be able to.
Right. One of the misconceptions for me in our culture about happiness or fulfillment, if we want to use those interchangeably, we've broken down so much of what they mean. So I think we can at this point. I think people are with us. One of the misconceptions I think we have is that when we get this job or this degree or this house in this specific neighborhood and drive the car or whatever it might be, then we'll be happy, then we'll be fulfilled. So along the way, this journey does, perhaps for some, become really painstaking. And what am I doing this for? Similar to what you're speaking about. So, but then I think there's this other element where people will get to the mountaintop and go, they'll look around and go, "What was this all for?" Do you find that many of your clients are feeling this kind of emptiness because they didn't listen to their soul, because they weren't authentic to their own path? Maybe they were listening to teachers or parents who were urging them to do something that really wasn't aligned for them.
Yes, I've seen definitely both. I've seen individuals who I will only be happy if this, or this, my children get into this college, or I have this much money, or I'm married to this person. And sometimes that happens. They marry that person and they are indeed happy, or their children get into that college and they are indeed happy. But oftentimes, if you put your happiness and believe the root of it is something external, external things change. And so, unless you can learn how to find the root of it within yourself as well, then something's going to change and it might be short lived, right? And I've also had the opposite, people that have it all and come to me that despite having it all, I still feel empty inside. Why? What's missing? And that's where we look at that biopsychosocial spiritual framework to see what is missing and how do we optimize where you're at.
Do you find that people generally have 1 or 2 areas of that framework that are lower than the others?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, yes. And the first one we have to evaluate is biological, because if the biology isn't where it needs to be, then changing all the other things becomes difficult. And there's many different ways to, positively change biology, but that's one of the first things. You can change biology with exercise, you can change it with diet, you can change it with medication, with supplements. But we have to know what we're dealing with. We have to know genetic predispositions, family history, epigenetics, the medical labs, all of those things. That's really, really important.
Yes. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. I truly believe that you are making a big difference in the world. Your website is phenomenally gorgeous, and there's so much information there, including how to get your book, annayusim.com.
Yes. Thank you, Ryan. And I love what you're putting out into the world. And thank you for having me.